They say that Martin Luther King closed his notebook before he came up, so people would say, speak without notes. I'm not that person, so excuse me. So, first service I said that I haven't done this in a while. It's been 16 years since I've been in front of a church, so I can't say that now. It's not true. It's been about an hour. But it's newer to me to figure out exactly how things go. Like, how does one start these things? And one of the things I remember from when I was a kid going to, Adventist churches in the area was that you always talk about, like, what was preached the week before. And as I understand it, y'all just finished the thing about contradictions in the Bible, right? Is that right? So probably not a good idea for me to say, start with the Bible says. But I would offer that there's the people that write the Bible in their search for God, and the people that read the Bible and search for God, that there's kind of a shared understanding, maybe not a contradiction, but like a thread that kind of runs through, right, before we get started. And so with that, there's kind of certain assumptions one can make if one's somebody who seeks God through the Bible, who seeks God through Jesus, that's some things that we can kind of broadly agree on, right? What are these things, right? I think we got to start at, at the beginning, in the beginning maybe. So who knows the Genesis story? I'm not going to read the whole thing. Nobody's going to read Genesis when you're familiar. God created the heavens and the earth, and then and then the waters and the animals and the plants, and then human beings. And then at the end of chapter 1, God says something, right? Some of you may know the words. I always read them. I'm like, because it's in English, usually in most versions of English, there's two pairs of words in chapter 1 and chapter 2 that God uses, that God tells people what to do, right? So the first two words are subdue, yikes, and rule, kind of also yikes, right? I'm going to do what, I don't know this whole pastoring things, but hey, let's go back to the language. What does the Hebrew say, right? So subdue, pretty yikes word. It's a rare word in the Hebrew Bible. The word that is translated there as subdue is kavash, right? It's, subdue, put under, hold down, but it's usually done where other places where we see the word subdue in the Bible in other words. So like there's to humble. I can't even read my notes. There's kana is to humble. Kara is to make bow, right? To enfeeble. That's not this. This is, subdue, like putting something down for its own good. Like you don't crush your kid when they have to take a nap, right? But you subdue them. Like, hey, this is doing a thing that's good for you, that makes you better, that puts you kind of in line with kind of the world around you, that makes you more of yourself. That kind of subdue, like discipline or yoke almost. The other word is rule, which is less electric than subdue, but still rule. Okay, so human beings rule the world. But the word there is rada. And so there's other words that are used for rule. And this one's also rare, and it's usually used in relationship to God being sovereign, like God ruling everything, right? It's not like the Philistines in Judges rule the Hebrews. That's another word entirely. That's, where is it? I can't even read. But that's like, rule as rada is different than like rule as crush. That's mashal. And so God doesn't tell us to mashal the world, to like crush the world, to oppress the world. It's to operate like God rules us, like God created us for God. God created nature for us, and us for nature, right? And so that's Genesis 1. Genesis 2, the words are less difficult, but they're there. So there's till, I think Genesis 15, there's till and there's serve. There's till and there's keep, excuse me. And so the word, it's like, okay, till the soil, you cultivate, whatever. The word for till is abad, and it's used till to serve, to dress, to prep something. In 2 Kings, it's used for worship, like people who attend the false god Baal, like they abad him, right? So God's telling you then with the garden, God's telling human beings with the garden, like, serve this, dress this, make this better, cultivate its better aspects, right? Like it's a thing, and you have to be part of it to make it its full self. And then the last word is shamer, keep, We see this almost 500 times in the Bible, and it's usually keep my commandments. Pay attention. Take heed. Hold this in your heart. My dad was, when I was very young and I was kind of nodding off, but I'd be like, pay attention. I never really liked it, but that's Shema, like to keep the land, to keep the garden, to pay attention to it, right? To exercise authority the way God exercises authority with us, walking with us, making us more ourselves. That's the original responsibility, right? Of like the oldest stories of the people who read and write and use the Bible that's the relationship human beings have with nature. That it's connected, like we're connected to it the way that we're connected to each other and the way that we're connected to God. So we're not in Eden anymore, but that doesn't really change. So the first law, Moses, in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, like when you have your land, don't take all the stuff. Harvest once, let the poor take it. And we see that again in Ruth. That's where Ruth and Boaz meet, right? The threshing field. There's other places like don't muzzle an ox when it's treading grain. Let it eat. When you're going to war, don't cut down fruit trees. You can cut down other trees. Don't cut down fruit trees. Like there's this emphasis on the land and its products where God says, that's mine, and all of you together as a people are holding it. You don't own that. Don't buy or sell land. 7 years, you can't even grow stuff. Every 7 years, let it sit. You take what it gives you. Trust me. Trust me in this earth that I've put for you, right? And that's not just, again, we now, okay, some people say, well, that's the Old Testament. What about Jesus, right? Paul writes that like all of earth groans, all creation groans, waiting for Jesus, right? When Isaiah talks about like when God leads, the trees clap their hands, the mountains sing. So when we are right, when we're walking with God, when we're connected to God and we're connected to each other, the earth rejoices. The living earth is pleased, is happy. And then when we sin, like if you look at Ezekiel and Jeremiah, like one of the sins they talk about is blood on the land, wasting the land. Ezekiel talks about like, oh, is eating my creation not enough for you? You have to muddy the waters too. That you have to tread out the grain too, right? So the way that our stewardship of the earth, our relationship with each other, and our relationship with God are connected in all of these things. And I'm not saying, okay, we need to move to Mentone, move to a cabin. I'm not saying that we do or don't need to use plastic straws, right? But I think, especially in this moment when there's so much going on because we know our relationships with each other, our relationships with God and with the natural earth, they're not where they should be. We know that. That's the great story of human experience. But God also promises in the Bible that David asked, make a new heart within me. Jesus says, I am making a new creature out of you. And so when we hear, and there's this thing in broader kind of Christian, okay, the world is ending, new heaven, new earth, we don't need to worry about this one. That's not true. God is making new people out of you and me. That doesn't mean we don't care for our bodies and our minds. God is making a new spirit in you. That doesn't mean that you have to abandon your responsibilities or the people that love you and you love them. And so when God, with that in mind, when we think about a new heaven and a new earth, and we think that there are fires and there is pollution and everything is terrible, and there's nothing I can do. That's the story of redemption, is there is nothing we can do singularly. That singularly all we can do is choose to mend that relationship together. And that mending our relationships together, mending our relationships with each other as a people, mending our relationships with the planet as a people, mending our relationships with God as a people, the same way that this brokenness all lives together, that the fixingness all lives together. And with that, I want to pass it to Elise and Charles.
Thank you so much. It was so beautiful. I feel so lucky to be here with everyone in a room full of people. It's been a long time. It's been a long time since I've heard live music, and it's just, so wonderful and soul-filling, so thank you. So I'm here to talk about climate change. It's kind of a bummer deal. When we hear messages around climate change, when we see what's happening in our world, I feel like there's a lot of loss. And when I talk with people, I hear that in their voices. Sadness over wildfires, grief at the loss of maybe homes from wildfires, people they know who've lost their homes. And it's hard. And a lot of people, I think, feel like this is something that is overwhelming, and they don't know really where they fit in and what they can do about it. And so I want to share that for me, my experience in sort of finding hope and energy to contribute to this huge problem has really centered around 4 things. And that is acknowledging the loss, processing the grief, finding community, and taking action. So the first part, acknowledging the loss. What have we lost? Well, a lot. Carbon emissions are already at dangerous levels in our atmosphere. This has led to a warming world where we see prolonged droughts, we see mega fires, we see extreme weather and heat and catastrophic hurricanes, and of course, the really heartbreaking thing, along with the loss of our natural world, is the human cost of these changes. Last year, over 4 million acres burned in our state. That's 4% of California's landmass. And so many people lost their homes, lost their communities, lost their sense of safety. And worse than that, I think it's why we call climate change a threat multiplier, because these burdens and losses fall disproportionately on communities of color and disadvantaged communities, poor people, Black people, brown people, and they often have to suffer the burdens the most. So when I think about all this, that's a really heavy thing to carry, to process. And I'm a big believer in processing the grief and talking about it as a way of relieving that heaviness. And the truth is, we're all grieving the loss of our world, the loss of communities as we know it, maybe the loss of our health. And I think about first I was always stumped by, well, how can I fix this? What can I do? And it really isn't about what I do alone. It's about how we fix this together. And so when you get to that point where you feel like the suffering is so much to carry, don't feel like you have to carry it alone. And that really comes to finding a community, because just like you individually did not create this climate crisis, you are not individually responsible for fixing it. Really, the only way we are going to do this is together, and we need everyone. And so finding that community of people that you can talk with about your concerns, your anxiety, and it doesn't even have to be a new community. Maybe it is. Maybe you should go volunteer with a new group of people, but maybe it's also a group of people in your workplace. Maybe there's a community already around you that is thinking about these things and feeling these things and wants to do something about it. And for me, that was where I found relief, in finding others who were concerned about this, who cared about this, and said, we want to do something together. So that brings me to taking action. What can we do? And, Alice Walker said the most common way we give up our power is believing we have none. And all y'all do have power, and you should use it, and you should speak up. And together, we can do so much more than alone. It's not about us being perfect, it's about us being persistent. And so I think the wonderful thing about a community, too, is then you have these people who can help you, who can carry you through this, who share that burden and who want to do the work. And the thing I fear when I think about how we individually process the overwhelming problem that is the climate crisis is not grief or burnout or anger. Those things can be relieved and channeled into action. They can be relieved through rest. But the worst thing I fear is cynicism, the idea that we're too small, that we can't do anything, because that's exactly what the fossil fuel companies and a lot of the corporations who are contributing the most to this problem want you to feel. So I hope that we can all do this together, because the worst thing about grief is thinking you bear it alone. And the truth is, we're all in this. We're all bearing it. So find your community, take action, and feel better.
Hey, what's up, Paradox? Good to be back. So I grew up right here in the Inland Empire, and one of my most vivid memories is from my freshman year of high school. My mom put me in this summer program where they took us around to all these different parts of the Loma Linda Medical Center to look at like nursing, EMTs, dentistry, all this stuff. And it was a big group of about like 20 other kids, and on the last day, we were gonna go see cadavers. And I didn't know what a cadaver was. I just thought it was like something sciencey, had nothing to do with me. Like I was thespian, not a STEM kid. So I remember going into the Centennial Complex, I will never forget it, and walking downstairs and seeing a cadaver for the first time. And they pull back this blanket, lift up the chest, and start telling us about everything that's inside. And part of it is they pull out the lungs. And I have not seen many lungs in my day, but these ones were a little rough around the edges, to say the least. And it wasn't because this man was a smoker, as we would assume. It was simply because he lived in California. And when I began to think about that, and it stuck with me, not only because it was the first time I saw a body, but I also saw face to face what the long-term effects of my health were just by where I chose to live. And it kind of raised the question of where is our state with this? What is the progress that's happening? Because you look up in Northern California in the Bay Area where I live, and we have fires that are turning the sky red, and have to check what the air quality is every single day. And you have down here where the rate of asthma and pneumonia through ER visits right here in San Bernardino have doubled since 2016. And so who's responsible for all of this? And so today I'm not really gonna talk to you guys about recycling or, not using plastic straws, save the turtles, all that. No, I'm gonna tell you this, and I want you to listen to this. 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. And I don't know about you, but I'm not a CEO. So I personally, that weight and that grief that Elise just talked about, it's so much bigger than any one individual could even face. And so how do we approach that? And since 2010, more than 174 million million square feet of industrial space has been developed here in the Inland Empire. And the majority of this is warehouses. And these warehouses are built usually close to low-income communities of color, and they produce a lot of emissions. And this is with the amount of energy it takes to run the facilities, as well as the amount of trucks that are going back and forth to fulfill our two-day shipping. So this, with these warehouses comes increased traffic and pollution, and it ultimately has made the Inland Empire one of the most polluted regions in the country. And that's kind of a lot to take in, and it's even more unsettling when you realize this is where we live. And Amazon, one of the big warehouse people we have over here, has taken on this new initiative at the San Bernardino Airport, where they're planning on expanding the airport by 700,000 square feet to build their new logistics hub, whatever they do there. And this hub is going to bring 26 additional flights and 500 trucks out of this area every single day. And collectively, it's going to emit 1 ton of daily air pollution right here. And how do we, normal people, not CEOs, take on these big corporations? And just like Elise talked about, it's a kind of a collective effort. There's this agency down here that we have called the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and they do pretty much what their name says, air quality management. And if they choose to do so, politics gets in the way sometimes, they could implement measures and enforce these measures on warehouses to force them to, if they don't want to pay a fine, to have to make some improvements to the way that they run their work. And this could look like, putting skylights in the warehouses to bring in more natural light, use less energy. Like, the sun is not a problem here. And also, retrofitting those warehouses with solar panels on the top can make a really big difference. But one of the biggest differences that they can make is by upgrading their fleet of 500 trucks or thousands of trucks to electric or low emission vehicles. And one of the biggest things that I think this community can call for and put the pressure on this agency is to regulate the amount of trucks that are coming in and out of this area on a daily basis. Because these warehouses are right next to schools, they're advised to be 1,000 feet away, but advised never really works out that way. So that's kind of a lot to take in, and it's kind of like, how do we sort of take action on that? Like, we're just average daily people. I still work a 9 to 5. Like, I'm just like everyone else here. So it's bridging the gap between learning and action. Everything we've learned today and acting on it. And so how do we do that? First, we ask ourselves, like, what sparks joy? Like, what makes you feel fulfilled? Like, what makes you feel happy? Because if you're not fulfilled in the work, like, you're gonna burn out. And burnout just kind of leaves us right back where we started. And they're like, oh, like, he's not working on it anymore, so we can keep doing whatever we want. And secondly, it's, what are you good at? What talents and skills do you have? I started working with the organization Elise and Sam are with a little bit ago to develop social media graphics. Like, that's what I was doing. That was like where I was at in my career, and I was able to make little swipe throughs about, like, here's everything you need to learn about fracking and stuff. And that was the contribution I was able to make. And then lastly, ask yourself, like, what is the work that needs doing? That's a hard question to answer, especially if you don't have, like, someone like me banging on your door every day, like, hey, this is happening. It starts with searching and connecting with a group that's already doing that work, because they're already here. There's so many community-based organizations that are fighting this fight, but they don't have the same, they don't have the same resources to compete with Amazon. And so it's really an all hands on deck sort of effort. And the environmental movement has a long history of being one that's mostly white-led, and the fires come in, and the group of environmentalists come in, and they save the animals, and they gather, like, help the plants or whatever, and they leave the people there to face the worst of it. And so we have the obligation to build an inclusive movement where people who live next to warehouses are represented, the communities that live next to the levees, like at Katrina, are represented, and the brown and black people who live in public housing right next to oil drills with lead paint and just pure environmental racism have a seat at the table. And it's really up to all of us to kind of create that movement. And so I really hope that you guys start asking some of the important questions and start putting yourselves in the uncomfortable spaces to build an inclusive movement, because we really could use your help.